Okay, hot take incoming. Practically everyone everywhere agrees that feel or pocket or groove is the most important thing on drums. And many of us agree when certain drummers have great feel. Steve Jordan, Nate Smith, Steve Gadd. But here's the controversial part. Many of us still don't know how high the bar is, nor spend enough time focused on feel. Evidence. Mountains of comments, videos, anecdotal conversations, etc. I've seen and been a part of, versus the relatively small number of drummers who seem to have mastered it. But is this really controversial? I bet we'll mostly agree on two things. First, that feel or pocket gets a lot of lip service, and the people love the great drummers who do it well. I'll give you two more from the rock tradition, Bill Ward and Matt Cameron. And second, that it's still elusive for most drummers. Like, if I showed you this Nate Smith groove and asked what specific things you would change about your own beat to sound more like Nate, like the top 3 things you'd change if you had to sound more like this in a week, could you tell me specifically? Well, today we're going to tackle the surprisingly complex and elusive world of feel. And this is not going to be another video where I just tell you to use the metronome. Though of course that's important. And you can click this video to check the specifics of that. No, today we're going to dig more into the question of why. Like, what specifically makes feel so difficult? But don't worry, we'll also have some actionable tips that will improve your feel right away. And I don't want to paint this like it's 5 tips that'll improve your feel this week, but we'll have some concepts that I think will really change the way you think about it. And a free transcription of everything I discuss available for download at the link below the player. I'm Nate, and this is the 80/20 Drummer. Stay tuned. Before we get into the principles of good feel for drums, little disclaimer. This video is for the drummer who either knows their feel is not what they want it to be and wants it to improve, or the drummer wondering if their feel is any good. In a small way, it might be for the drummer who feels good when they play, but is wondering if it sounds or feels that good to the audience or other members of the band. It is not for the drummer who is fully aware what they sound like on recordings and completely satisfied. As I mentioned in this video, the only real objective thing in music is whether it sounds and feels good to you. Maybe with the slight caveat that the you in this case has been around and heard enough music to develop your own tastes. Point being, my aim is not to tell any drummer who's happy with their feel that they're crap. With that out of the way, let's talk about why feel is harder than you'd think it would be. And to give you an illustration, I'll share a story about when I was first learning the drums. When I was young, I was taking drum lessons at the local music store, as you do, and I worked my way through some drum books. Advanced Funk Studies by Rick Latham was one. I'd get assigned a page, I'd go away for the week and practice beats on that page, then I'd come back from my lesson and receive a check and permission to move on to the next page. In that way, I finished the book. For me at the time, playing the beat meant playing the notes on the page, in the order they were notated, in something resembling time. There was zero thought to the idea that subtle shifts in touch, or where I played things in time, might affect how this beat felt to a listener. The beat was the beat. During this time, I would hear drum beats or songs that made me want to bob my head or dance, and I realized that was a thing. But, and I'm not exactly sure how to put this, I hadn't really connected the dots that there was anything for me to do as the drummer other than just play the beat. I had just assumed the magic happened automatically, or it was because of the audio mix or something. Years later, playing with songs, I'd feel like I was in the groove. I'd have that transcendent experience of vibing with the song. But if you're listening from the audience, it wouldn't feel or sound that way to you. So from my own story, let's pull 2 big principles. Principle the first. The feel is not automatically good just because you play things in the right order. I think this principle will speak to the drummer who has learned to play some beats and plays all the notes in the order they're supposed to be and just doesn't know if it feels good. If you don't even know if it feels good to you behind the drums, that's fine. Almost all of us started there. The next step is to start developing taste or paying attention to your taste. I used to get this comment on a lot of my videos. You just have to feel it. And some people would say I needed to go to Africa or Brazil. And I used to rail against those comments because when we get later on in the chain, that's not the lowest hanging fruit in my opinion. But at this stage, the commenters are right. So, sorry, commenters. I probably should not have gone so hard. Frowny face. The point is, just like food or wine, you're in a stage where you get to develop your tastes. First off, there's probably already some music that makes you tap your foot. You just may not know it. But I'd recommend going through the old playlist and making a new playlist of good feel songs. As a typical American suburban kid growing up mostly in the 90s, some examples of music that made me think, wow, there's something magic here, were things like Bodhisattva by Steely Dan and Oh My God by The Police. Some Bob Marley, some Talking Heads, And later, Smells Like Teen Spirit, Spoon Man, and some 90s rap like Tribe and De La Soul. What's your version of that stuff? Also, some drum feel classics I can recommend. Sissy Strut by The Meters. What Is Hip by Tower of Power. Funky Drummer by James Brown. On the rock side, The Ocean by Zeppelin. War Pigs, Fire by Hendrix. Obviously, this is a drop in the bucket. So much music. Bazillion stuff like this. A couple modern classics. Nate Smith with the Fearless Flyers, Ace of Aces. Louis Cole. Random one, Lupe Fiasco with Chris Dave and Glasper. But here's my point. Start paying attention to what makes you want to dance. What makes you bob your head, tap your foot. The next step is going to be to try to feel that when you drum. And eventually, that'll happen. Which brings us to principle 2. Principle the second. It's not automatic that just because something feels good to you, it is. Or more precisely, it's not automatic that just because it feels good to you as you're playing, that it will feel as good listening back to the recording. But let's back up. Because eventually you move past, is this good, to actually feeling yourself when you're playing. I remember when I was on the cruise ship playing every night and started to come into my own and really dance behind the kit. And that's an important step. You go from being kind of unsure of yourself to at least capturing the feeling inside of yourself. And for anyone that's tempted to feel bad about themselves just because of what I'm about to say next, just remember, that's an important step along the journey. It means you're starting to have taste. To know what feels good to you and incorporate it into your playing. And as I've alluded, it's here that we have to tackle the next step. Because what feels good to us in the moment is not always what's going to sound good when we listen back. I remember, and I've mentioned many times on this channel, among the first times I was really feeling myself with a band, then listened back to the recording and found lots of little instances where I was speeding up and slowing down without realizing it. That's because we don't come out of the womb feeling time accurately. Know how sometimes a minute can feel like an hour if we're bored, and vice versa if we're having fun? Yeah, that also happens on the micro level when we play. I've already linked the card to the video where I went super deep on this, but some common examples are, we'll feel like we're in great time playing consecutive offbeats, especially ands of 2 and 4. When listening back, we're actually rushing. That's because until we train ourselves, there's a temporal optical illusion there. It seems slower than it is. It's often the reverse if we're going from 4 to 1 on the downbeats. Or playing half or even whole notes. We'll tend to drag, because those seem to us in the moment faster than they really are. I should say, this is not the same thing as human feel, like Bill Ward or Bonham, or a funky lilt like Samba from Brazil or Bata from Cuba. This is non-danceable distortion. Nor is it something where it feels good to be the player, and feels good to be the audience. It's just that when you put a metronome to it, it wouldn't feel good. I'm talking about distortions where if you were listening back to your own recording 5 minutes later, you'd feel the distortion. And it's here that the whole metronome regimen from all my courses and my coaching and some of my Drumeo stuff comes into play. But again, first video on the list if you click the card here. And if you want to go deeper, click the link below the player and grab your transcription, and then sign up for my Groove course the next time it opens. But we won't get into that here. So we've been talking about distortions you can feel immediately upon listening back to a recording you just made. But what about stuff that would have sounded good to you at the time, but 10 years later you'd listen back and realize it could have used a little refinement? Well, it's here that we come to principle 3. Principle the third. Above a certain level, having good feel is actually a lot like having a local accent in the language. Okay, time to work some Spanish into this lesson. We're going to ask ChatGPT to describe how to mic some drums in Spanish.
Para grabar batería con micrófonos, lo ideal es usar varios micros colocados estratégicamente. Por ejemplo, puedes poner un par de micrófonos overhead para capturar el sonido general del kit, uno en el bombo para darle cuerpo y profundidad, y otro en la caja para resaltar el ataque. Si quieres un sonido más completo, también puedes añadir micrófonos en los toms y un micrófono de ambiente para capturar el sonido de la sala.
Did you notice she switched accents midway through? Could you tell me from what accent to what other accent? Well, it just so happens I asked her to start in an Andalus accent and then switch midway to a Colombian accent. Let's try an easier one. So much easier, you probably don't need an illustration. You'd be able to tell right away if somebody started speaking English in a North American accent and switched to Manchester or Liverpool, or if someone is a native speaker or has spent enough time in the US to be close, or if English wasn't their first language. Point of all of this, there are subtleties that only reveal themselves after years of experience. And one of those is feel in drumming. When I took a lesson with the great drummer percussionist Jamie Haddad, he said something like this: "Do you know how many nights a week over how many years the jazz greats were doing gigs in the same clubs? And we wonder why we can't play with them." And Jamie gave my friend Kyle and me a simple pattern to play, and didn't tell us much more. Years later, I think I finally understand the purpose of that little pattern: to rep something enough that the subtleties start to come out. Nowadays, we have all sorts of teaching techniques designed to keep us in the learning sweet spot and not make us bored. But at least some of that is padded proxy for just learning to hear something simple really deeply. All of which is to say, after years of reps, you'll hear yet more subtleties. Which is one thing that makes prodigies so startling. They have what seems to be a 45-year-old's degree of subtlety at age 18. But there are a couple principles here that I've picked up over the years. First, this is genre specific for certain genres. Jazz, samba, anything with a non-quantized feel is going to require reps in that specific genre, in just the same way you speaking with a North American accent doesn't guarantee you'll be able to do Northern Ireland or South Africa. But second, a lot of groove idioms do kind of cross over. In the same way that if you grew up listening to Bostonians and lived with cowboys, you can probably code switch a bit. If you play funk and soul and blues, there's a lot of overlap, which is why practicing these multi-purpose grooves with a high degree of subtlety will get you far. But Nate, what's the takeaway, mate? Well, if you'll excuse that terrible Cockney, let's summarize. Our feel sucks because it's hard. We're probably born with the ability to detect stuff that makes us want to dance, but translating that into the ability to create that on our own on the drums takes decades. First, we have to become cognizant of what feels good to us behind the drums. Then we have to work to train our timing so that what feels good to us in the moment also feels good 5 minutes later listening to the playback. Then starts the long journey of developing a local accent in the beats we play, which is to say, hearing them with a degree of learned subtlety akin to knowing the difference between Manchester and East London.
And that's how you get the gig.
Did we do a thing, you guys? One off-the-cuff thought I want to leave you with is the danger in all of this of losing the fun of playing. And I really want to harp on that because when we went through the whole section where I was talking about, here's your playlist, here are some songs I like to get you started, here's how you start to be able to dance behind the kit. That's really fragile, and even as you work through some of these other exercises, I don't want people to lose that. And I also don't want people to feel like this is going to be like eating glass. Sometimes it can be hard, but try to capture and maintain that sense of fun, even as you refine things. On that note, hope you guys will grab your free transcription down below, and as a premio for joining the list, one of the courses you'll get is a free course on improving your groove. And then later on, if you want to go even deeper, we've got my groove course you can sign up for when it opens. Dudes, it's been real, always enjoy these. See you again real soon in another lesson of the week.